Hello, everybody, and welcome to our world today, the Unionist perspective. Today, we are looking at a few topics that we believe very much highlight the theme of taking an impactful initiative. And some stories that have surfaced this week that feel like there's a significant focus on starting to do things that have an impact on the planet, things that have an impact on how people, and specifically women, are represented across politics and business and in some other public spaces. And we believe that that's, well, for me specifically, I think it's quite aligned to the theme of International Women's Day as well. So it makes quite it's quite a nice view of what's happening specifically in Spain with their equal rights legislation. So that was something that stood out to me quite a bit. And so I'd like to open it up to the team. And I think also, just to highlight the perspective of how you feel as a divine feminine in society and your representation across various spaces, and how you would feel if this type of legislation surfaced in the country that you're living in. So yeah, we'll open it up to the team and we will just flow through in our conversation.
I find this really fitting that Spain had this law signed, and we're talking about it on International Women's Day. I think it's very meaningful in France because International Women's Day is actually called International Day of Women's Rights. So it's specifically about taking social action in order for women to be valued and more respected in life. And so I feel like most of the time we say a lot of things about gender parity without necessarily doing a lot of things about gender parity. And so it allows maybe for things that we've seen this year about abortion rights being kind of jeopardized or things like that. And a lot of people here in France actually say that, hey, it's not about wishing us a happy International Women's Day, but it's about thinking how the law are impacting our lives and also how the culture is impacting our lives, like the culture of sexism and things like that. And so most people would say that it feels a little bit like a stretch and overreaching to inscribe gender parity into a law in a country. But I don't feel it's a coincidence that it's the first thing we're talking about today, and I do feel like it has its impacts. And it sets a precedent from leadership towards the people in terms of the culture of the country and how it treats its women. And so, yeah, I feel it's just a pretty good example. And for the Spanish people. And I just feel like there's something powerful about feeling this, okay, this is law now. And there's this kind of respect for justice and law that feels more powerful and grounded than just words, So I don't know how you guys feel about that. And maybe it's because I'm French, but I have kind of an extreme view on International Women's Day and how gender parity should be treated. So yeah, I'm just curious to hear about what you guys feel about that.
Oh, I don't think it's extreme at all. I think what's been happening should have been way overdue. And I like what you said about the precedents, because in Spain, they're not only looking at the gender quota for the government, but also the CEOs and the major corporations for their boardrooms too. And Spain apparently has been leading in that prior to this law to be drafted and going towards it. It has been around like 40, 47 for the government. And I'm not sure about CEOs, but it has been leading up to this. And now there's also a law that's been drafted for easier transition into gender, as well as more rights for minorities and like younger women. So yeah, I definitely think this was long overdue and should be a leading example for a lot of countries. And it kind of feels like, the quota for college, like when it comes to discrimination and having at least a sort of diversity within a college campus and making sure that you fill those numbers. It really brings in people that were underprivileged into those spaces to help their generation and help their family. So of course, this is a very smaller example compared to like a country and filling the quota with all genders. But it definitely shows that there will be improvements in individual families and individual generations because of this quota. And yeah, I feel like it should have been already done, and this processing is definitely aligned to its highest good.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I definitely believe that it is overdue, but having said that, I also feel like the fact that it becomes a legal requirement shows that the divine feminine is stepping into her power and claiming her space to the extent that laws are being rewritten to entrench it in society. And so we probably also need to respect that that level of healing has taken place within the divine feminine. Something doesn't align coincidentally like this on International Women's Day without some powerful healing. And we've also seen in the past where, as Yuri mentioned, there were certain things around abortion, laws around abortion being abolished and all those kind of things. And so, yeah, I think and I mean, that was probably late last year. So it's nice to see that almost dichotomous shift, because it's literally the swing from one side almost to the other. It's like two sides of a continuum, and you kind of have to appreciate the amount of healing that is required to have such a significant shift. It's also not coincidental that as we have this conversation, there are three divine feminines having this conversation today. Like it all aligns. And so I think it's just symbolic of healing that has taken place, that is starting to filter through consciousness to say that actually the divine feminine is starting to accept her legitimacy. And so that legitimacy is being legitimized in law. It can't get more powerful than that. The rule of law is almost the final rubber stamp in this process, like to unwind certain things, regardless of whether it now goes into parliamentary debates and things like that, to unwind archaic views around representation. Just it requires a significant amount of effort into accepting your own personal power and accepting your healing, and for that healing to have been grounded so well that it becomes legal. So I think it's very fitting. It's also, as you said, Nadia, very overdue. But at the same time, I think it's also something to be celebrated from the perspective of society. Whether it's in one country right now, it's still a representation of a shift because that it's made such international law. Well, it's such international news, so it's quite a strong representation of a shift in the mindset of the place of all people from a gender point of view in society.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that shift that's happening. And I want to ask, what was the foundation that grew to the shift in Spain? And how can we learn from that foundational action that they took, the nourishment and the healing that they took for them to achieve this? I think it's...
I actually felt it was very deep rooted. Like they had, I feel like they had kings and queens, but at some points were more equal. I think during like Franco's regime, like extreme right regime,
I'm not familiar.
in the 40s, they had a lot of like women taking the lead of rebellion and Republicans, and a lot of like powerful people and women to just like support the country, and a lot of people stepping into their power. And so, not that it's not like that in other countries, I think it's like that in a lot of countries, but it just manifested in a very peaceful way in their country. But sometimes it's just like decades and centuries of healing. When we started this discussion, Seeking Harmony, and later Our World Today, the Unionist perspective, we literally said that some things that were true, some patterns that were true in like the two world wars still had consequences, and we still felt through these patterns today. So I don't think it's like an overnight shift, but it's very powerful. And I like how Grenville framed it into like, we kind of have to appreciate the amount of healing that was done there, to the extent that it's now a law in Spain, because I feel like it's an accomplishment for all of those discussions in Black Lives Matter and later for other news, where we were almost feeling sad that and feeling that things weren't moving and advancing, and that it wasn't fast, and the amount of healing that we had to do about that, and seeing that it actually brings results into society. Like people are healing things, and consciousness is advancing. And it's not because you don't see this right away that it doesn't have an impact, and that it's not shifting. And I feel like it's very, very hopeful. I like that there's a positive message like this to take on this special day, and it just brings a lot of relaxation and relief into me, that whatever you do on the journey, like there is like you have like some kind of dharma, like your choices matter. You don't see it just yet, but it matters. And so I have a sense, to go back to your question, that some of these things that women did in the 40s that helped their societies advance are bringing fruits today. And it's because people don't give up. amidst the detractors and people that don't believe in them, that it's better right now. And I want to say, like, I want to go back a little bit on positive discrimination, like the quotas in colleges, and positive discrimination in general, which is what's happened now. And it's often, I was in the School of Social Sciences, and so in the high classes, high cultural classes, it's often seen as very not good positive discrimination. It's like a bad word in there. A lot of the times, because at least in France, there is this sense of false ascension on merit. It's like they all feel that they're self-made or that they work to get there, and don't see that maybe they had some kind of capital or foundation that helped them get there too. That Black women, for example, or other people from minorities don't have. And the thing that made like being in a School of Social Sciences difficult for me, because there was like deep-rooted patterns of everything, of every ism in there. And so I feel it's very healing for me, who at this time was doubting, like, well, is positive discrimination actually a false merit? Like, are we taking the place of other people because we're taking our place in colleges or in high positions of leadership? And I feel like our discussion today is fair to say, no, actually, we're not. We're taking our place. And it doesn't matter if it comes from a law that was passed or a quota, it's still our place. We're not like stealing anyone. And I feel it's well ingrained into the teachings of unions that it's not our responsibility to feel for other people and their experiences and their karma, and we're not robbing anyone by having success. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you in the sense that what in some countries would be called a level of positive discrimination might be in other countries called affirmative action and things like that. And literally it does come with, when uninformed, it comes with a sense of guilt, a sense of taking up something that wasn't taught to you as rightfully yours. And I think that is the almost the core of the lesson, is to understand what is rightfully yours. You have the right to take up space. And so whether that space is in politics, in business, in other public spheres of society, just in general in life, taking up your space does not equate to taking away from somebody else. And I think that is probably the bigger lesson that we need to learn and accept, that we are allowed to stand in our space and our power, and we are not responsible for somebody else's experience of us taking up our space. You know, the fact of the matter is, the law of the universe dictates that there's enough for everybody. Therefore, there should be enough space for everybody as well. And by association or by scientific fact, if there's enough space for everybody, then each individual one of us should be comfortable to take up our rightful space. It's kind of the law of logic.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and even the law of logic, because even in affirmative action, it's happened due to spiritual law. It became a process because God willed it to be a process, and God willed you to be in that space. And seeing that in Spain there is a law passing, they must have did a deep root healing of claiming their good. And then seeing on our side in America of us still struggling with abortion law, it means there needs to be more of a deep clearing of claiming our space, claiming our good, so that we can maintain that alignment. Even if the law has passed, we're still struggling with that. And I hope that struggle doesn't happen in Spain, but it seems like they have a deep rooted clearing of that. No, this belongs to you, and you're claiming that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does feel like claiming. It's very peaceful, but also very powerful. Like you can feel the energy shifting there, and it's moving in the right direction because it's felt by everyone. And yeah, I feel like in these times, like when these kinds of laws are passed, like the truth cannot be hidden. Like everyone is feeling it, and that's when we can most connect with like our internal compass. Like, okay, this is good, this feels good, this feels like the right direction, and this feels like the most loving thing for anyone involved. And I think that's what social sciences and like a lot of like their intellectual studies really lack today, is that thing of, does this feel good? There is a time to analyze everything and maybe play the devil's advocate and see everything from an external perspective, or study everything, or maybe go to the past to have answers. But there's also a time to be present and really ask yourself, like, okay, does this feel good in my heart? And if the answer is yes, like it's all that we need. And I feel like all types of sciences and disciplines will be much better and much more advanced. Like they'll advance much more quickly with it, just because they'll respect that even in sciences, like there's God, and in politics there's God. And that's funny because we were talking about that with economy, like bringing God there, and business, and now we're talking about bringing it to politics and sciences, and ultimately that's our goal. And like the fact that just by discussing here, we're discovering that that's actually the right way to do things. I think it's just reaffirming what we do with the teachings of Union and how it works and how it can truly be for everyone.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I also feel like there's the addition of not only that it feels good, but it feels natural. It feels normal, which makes it right. If it didn't feel so natural, it wouldn't feel good, but it wouldn't make sense, and it wouldn't bring the peace that is associated with feeling into what shift that creates, not only in our own consciousness, but at the collective level. It just feels normal. It feels right. Like anything counter to this has for the longest time felt wrong. And now this doesn't start to all of a sudden take a rubber stamp and feel right on the other end of the continuum. It just feels normal. It feels natural. It's kind of returning to the way it should be. And I think that for me is always a test, is if it feels right, if it feels normal, It's almost that it's almost the where we almost forget to appreciate the shifts that we do perceive through our healing, because things just start to feel more natural. But we forget where we almost forget where we've come from once we achieve that level of naturalness based on the healing that has taken place.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to more naturals. And one thing Yurin had said about the truth cannot be hid. That brings me back to a quote for Enoch and his newfound community about the world. And I'll bring that up once we start that topic. But yeah, for him, he also quoted the truth cannot be hidden in his own perspective. And I just feel like when we're working for ourselves, like loving ourselves, it's loving the entire collective. So it really is like phenomenal and a cause and effect.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, great jobs to those leaders for actually taking meaningful action there. I feel like we're seeing, I don't know if like in France and New Zealand and in Spain, it just feels like there are a bunch of just people that are ready and brave enough to just say, hey, this needs to be done. And so we're going to do it. And this needs to be moved. And
in such a natural way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. That deep desire to transcend the contrast, and it's just coming through more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Good. Yeah, that was good. So how do you feel about like moving on to another topic? What feels like what's the natural thing that is coming up right now? We have anti-poaching and we have Earth Percent initiative.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely feeling the Earth percent component. I just think it's such a powerful shift and such a powerful tribute to the Earth and to supporting initiatives around, well, in fact, to funding initiatives around supporting climate change and supporting the Earth. And I think it's a very powerful statement to have the Earth listed as almost as a credit, as a co-songwriter. So I think it's just a really smart initiative, because royalties generally do not stop. And so to list the Earth as a co-writer to a song and then entitle it to receiving royalties feels like a very powerful deposit into humanity.
It is. It is very powerful and very collective healing. A quote that Enoch, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. I believe it's Enoch. He was saying that there's two parts to a revolution. One where everyone realizes that the truth cannot be hidden. There's a problem going on and everyone's realizing it. And two is that everyone's realizing that everyone else is realizing that. And everyone wants to make a collective movement for that. So like we saw a collective movement in Spain, his natural movement into helping the earth came from many years of developing this and seeing that there's so many funds to go into the Earth Initiative, but they're so individual and they're so like spread out. There's not like a huge collective of recognition that we can all work together for this one cause. So I think him bringing that into an initiative is also healing as a collective and bringing unity into us and that recognition. So
Yeah. I like that. I like that influence and social media are actually stepping into this new kind of territory. It reminds me of like Spill, a new social media platform we talked about, in the sense that there's just something about like contrasting in a good way with this and how it worked before. I feel like in every part of our system today and consciousness, there's just this system of like taking from everyone and losing and maybe sacrificing. And I feel like for a great many years, like artists felt that way too, and they felt like they should use their influence to kind of do something that was right. And the fact that it's evolved, they've never given up on that, and that it's evolved into something that we can actually quantify and give back to the earth, and seeing how it's kind of reversing the system and shifting the culture in the sense that instead of taking, we're giving. It's just so nice because it's so healing on so many levels. It's healing for the consciousness, it's healing for the artists and their purpose. It's healing because like we take a lot to create power, energy, resources, data, and it's very energy consuming. And the fact that we just imagining that every artist could give back in that sense to the earth, and thinking that in enjoying your art in your own personal space and music, you can give back to the earth too, creating that kind of positive cycle. It feels like it kind of feels like we're gaining momentum in a way in some parts of our society, and it feels very relieving because it's like not this stuck energy of trying to figure out things and figure out how we can move past bad news and injustices anymore. And it's not that it's perfect, but there is also a sense that we're all claiming our power and saying, right, we're gonna move the boat forward in different ways, and just like our own little initiatives, individual initiatives are going to group, and soon we'll be 3, and then we'll be 10. And it's just going to have an impact on everyone. Because right now there are just like maybe there are not 10 people, but there are a few dozens, I would say. But who's to say that it's not going to transform and multiply, and then with all the resources gained in a year, for example, what things could be done for Earth. And it's only going to grow because we're never going to stop consuming music. So yeah, it's just a reflection on that kind of positive cycle and momentum that just feels good for once, instead of like talking about things that needs healing. It feels like, finally we're taking action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels healthy, and it feels like freedom. And I bring up healthy because being an artist, it takes a lot of energy. So you have to be paid a certain amount for that energy. And I know there's always this discrepancy about giving loyalty to the producers, and they aren't really treated fairly. In new artists, sometimes there's a lot of lawsuits because of their payments. So this feels so healthy, as if you're giving and you are giving guilt-free to a royalty that's always going to replenish you. And it feels like freedom because Enoch created this to give us more of a sense of control for our giving and our receiving. So it's not the big producers that are like, we're going to take 15% and like, there's no give and take about this. This is 1%, and you're receiving so much good because of it. So yeah, it feels like freedom.
Yeah, and something that stood out was just, in reading the article, was one of the artists saying that we receive so much from the earth in terms of being a muse and giving to us in terms of content and things like that. And so that was one of her major motivations in saying, what better way than to pay tribute to the earth in this way? And again, yeah, it really goes back to healing that cycle of giving and receiving, or in this instance, taking and giving. And yes, it's a marginal amount in relation to what probably is royalties, and the quantum of it, but at the same time, it's significant when considered that music is almost a global phenomenon. And a reason, mostly because English medium music reaches just about every place on earth. Might not necessarily be really well understood in every place on earth, but it literally reaches far and wide. And so, in that spirit of almost flooding the earth with the spirit of giving back, because the intention, if we understand the intention behind it, is to give back, to preserve, to conserve. It just kind of starts to also spill over that effect of the intention, which can only be beneficial in the long run. It might, and literally, it's as simple as all change starts with one step in the right direction. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be tiny. It can be the smallest measure that serves love.
Mm.
And so for me, it's a very positive message that's starting to shift the perspective of our previous conversations, that there's a call in consciousness for a shift, a balance, a rebalancing, change. And so we're starting to see layers of change coming through. And we can comfortably say that we have observed the opposite of the cycles in all of our conversations. So it's nice to see some positive change happening, regardless of how small it might feel. The scale of it doesn't diminish the intention behind it.
Yeah, we celebrated the small wins, and I think it's building up to celebrating the big wins too. And just imagining in terms of, like, we were talking about quantifying, but just imagining Brian Eno is the founder of Earth%. Imagine all of YouTube's royalties going to the earth, like 1% of all of YouTube's royalties going to the earth. It's always like, they're pop stars, so it's already huge. And just imagining one of these artists, for example, has a buzz on TikTok tomorrow, and feeling that this buzz, like people actually creating content about it, good or bad, it all goes to the earth. It's just, I think for me, an example of how, and a reflection on probably how the journey is always perfect. And it reminds me of one of Jeff's thoughts about earth and ascension and the Luciferian system and heaven on earth. And there's just this thinking that whatever happens is always perfect. And it's always like in God's plans, even when it seems imperfect, even when it seems separate, like we can never be separate from God. And so you would say that just one initiative is having such a big impact, and it's so giving, it's so pure in its essence that it's just God in people, like it's the divine in people expressing and coming through. And it just gives you another perspective on like, whoa, we're not just humans, we're souls as well, and people do beautiful things. And sometimes there are a lot of healings, a lot of like catastrophic things to heal through. Like we're talking about trail derailments, poverty consciousness in the past few weeks. And there are also a lot of good things, and a lot of good shining through. And it's just another reminder that as a consciousness, at the core, we're choosing peace. Otherwise, we wouldn't be there. We would be in a kind of apocalyptic life. And however, the many crises we've like been through, we're not there yet. So it just like brings a lot of relief that we're moving forward. And it may be small, but it amounts to something big. And we truly have a kind of a bank of dharma that we're all like funding. And it's just going to explode into goodness the more we heal and the more we move forward.
Yeah.
No, another thing that kind of stands out is in that giving back, we're literally also giving back to ourselves.
Mm.
In being a consumer in that way, and knowing that 1% of what we spend in terms of consuming goes back to where we're consuming from only to support us to, again, kind of just shows the cycle, the cyclicality of this process. But also it almost feels like the loop is kind of closing itself. The gap has been highlighted for so long in terms of the need to shift from a climate point of view and the desire for that shift. And now through a mechanism like this, we are contributing to the shift. However small that contribution is, the cycle is literally, it's almost coming full circle kind of thing. So it just shows you how everything works to complete that circle.
Yeah. And I wanted to reflect a little bit more on what you guys are speaking about, baby steps. And I feel like this is reflective to, we're speaking about baby steps and we're talking about the phenomenal effect that it will bring because of this little step. And it reminds me of the mirror exercise, how one mirror exercise has such a deep, phenomenal effect, not even for our lifetime, but all of our lifetimes, and for our generations. So this baby step is really like, you can see it directly in this world happening and how phenomenal it can be. Even though, when we do it eternally, we're thinking like, what big effect did it do? We can see it in our world. So.
Yeah, and I have to agree. This, just the fact that you reminding me of that was, one of the examples I came across in some other learning was this thing of the baby step and babies learning to walk. And and then the teacher was like, well, a baby doesn't take one step, fall down and decide, no, this walking thing isn't for me, kind of thing. The baby will get up and try again and try again and try again. And I think it's just that the concept of consistency and persistence more than anything else. It's just really perseverance. And it's something that Yoreen spoke to earlier, is that concept of not giving up. And we don't always see or feel, and well, generally we feel an immediate result, but we don't always see an immediate shift in our reality as a result of our healing. But that's never a reason to believe that the healing is not working.
It's also not always about the results. Like, it's just, there's a sense that for artists, you know, from Michael Jackson, you know, grouping everyone to sing "We Are the World" to Earth Percent. Like, for example, they knew that it wasn't like the ultimate answer to impact and social impact and climate change at their time, but they still did it. And that's kind of our design also in our life purpose, is to start doing things or believing things and share things even when we know it's not perfect. And literally someone will take inspiration from that and grow it. And that's what inventors do as well in science. And I feel like we can take a lot of lessons from that and be really methodic about like enjoying life and really sharing our core values with the world and sharing what we're about. And even though it seems like it won't do much in our lifetime, it's still going to inspire someone, and someone is going to take the idea and grow it and make a new universe and world out of it. And I think it's very powerful. It gives me like a lot of healing as an artist myself, or as a believer of the teachings of Union. Just sharing myself sometimes is enough, and just appreciating it. And sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I'm not seeing the results. Like, it's so tiring, and we must keep going and keep moving forward. And then like a few years after, boom, healing and results. And yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. And that also speaks to how powerful our choices are, because there is no space and time. So once he made that choice, once we make that choice, we can literally see our timeline being that powerful, being that potential. And like, of course, we're perfect beings as creation. So each step is leading to that same line of potential, same alignment of lifetime that we made that choice for. So yeah, it just completely transcends time and space with that choice, and of course that consistency with that choice.
So lessons of the day, keep going. Never
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Yeah, do you feel good to move on to our very last topic of the day?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nadia, would you like to kind of explain a little bit what the article on anti-poaching was about? And
Yeah, it leads us to this great discussion about the environment and, of course, the world, and taking care of the animals in our world. And ultimately, the creation of this tracking of people coming near, or elephants coming near a certain device, was made for the elephants not to go through plantations and not to destruct people and not to hurt people. There were some like cases where elephants trampled farmers. So initially it was for farmers to protect themselves. And then they realized that we can help the elephants too by going into smaller parts that don't really have sheriffs and don't really have the resources for troopers to protect the wildlife there. So if anyone comes near the vicinities of it, they're automatically notified that something's passing through, someone might be going for poaching. And I think it's very beautiful that not only are we thinking of ourselves individually and our welfare as plantation and our growth in food to, feed ourselves, but we're also thinking of the oneness in our animals and making sure they have the humanity, they have the rights to make sure that they're not getting killed and they're not being like, taking of their resources. So I think it was a very beautiful thought that AI definitely helped with. For me personally, AI kind of is like, it's bringing this grand like production right now in our world and even including it in therapy and such. And I think AI is perfect for this cause. And some causes may not be like ready for AI, but this one was very giving and receiving. What do you guys think about?
See, I think it's like yet another example of healing and choices to move forward instead of like getting stuck or looking to the past. Because a few months ago, I don't know if you were already there, we talked about how overpopulation of elephants in some countries in Africa and underpopulation in some countries were causing their own brand of problems. And they were thinking about reopening the ivory hunting and market for the overpopulated territories to kind of control the flow of elephants. And so the fact that AI and anti-poaching are coming up right now are actually the perfect response, because we were feeling into it and we didn't have an answer at that time. But
Oh, Yuri must have froze.
Yeah, I was just checking if it was the overall thing. So I think one of the things that probably stands out for me quite a bit is how technology is starting to serve the planet in a better way, starting to serve humanity, starting to serve the inhabitants of Earth in a much more almost real. I mean, it's almost instantaneous. So and I think that is the beauty of the system that they've developed. That it allows for almost instantaneous feedback in terms of what is happening, and also the smartness of the technology to be able to distinguish whether it was human or animal, and to literally keep a track of the movements of the human beings or animals in those spaces just starts to make it feel a lot more like there's a much greater relationship between technology and humanity, and that technology is starting to serve humanity in a healthier way, which feels like what's coming through the article more than just the purpose of kind of keeping elephants contained or avoiding the behavior of poaching. It's starting to show that stronger symbiotic relationship between technology and humanity. And I mean, the fact that it's AI driven also allows for machine learning, so that there's some level of predictiveness or predictability, or being able to predict certain patterns and certain trends, and to solve for those patterns and trends through the use of machine learning.
Yuri, you cut off there. We didn't catch what you said.
yeah, I don't know where I don't know where it froze exactly, but I was just saying that we had the problems a few months ago of overpopulation of elephants that were actually causing harm to human life in some regions. And so it feels good that instead of reopening poaching and the ivory market, this was the response. And we literally didn't have the answer months ago about how to have a new relationship between humans and elephants that wasn't involving taking from any parties involved. And so the fact that we didn't despair as consciousness and that now we're seeing this response just a few months later is for me just yet another proof that the healing does work and that we're due just to move forwards. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how, as Gwen was saying, it feels like we're having this symbiotic relationship with Earth and animals that we didn't have before. Like it was kind of fighting. Like, and it feels like we finally have the answer to where its evolutions doesn't have to take from anyone, especially Earth and its resources. And we're learning how to live with our need for growth and expansion, as well as not taking too much from our resources or giving back so that there's a cycle that feels better than what we're having right now.
Yeah, I want to pose another interesting news that's coming out. So AI is developing therapies for people to, robots to provide therapy. And I just found it hilarious because I can't imagine my math practitioner being a robot. Like it would be so, there would be no relationship with it. And so this is another take on AI. And how do you guys feel about this and this new development? Do they think that this could be possible for healing?
So interestingly enough, I suppose you would miss a level of the human connection, but I also feel like machine learning is probably one of the least understood advancements in life. So AI through coding, through repetition, starts to learn almost as a living organism.
That's true.
And so I feel like there might be a place for a very rudimentary level of dispensing certain insights into conditions, but I don't believe that AI will get to the point where it is super, where it super can literally replace the interaction of a human being. Because also one of the things that probably happens in our sessions is the almost, it's kind of the human logic applied in the situation, which I'm not certain that a machine can adapt or adopt so well. But it will be very interesting to see how it evolves. I definitely think the evolution of it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Rudimentary, if they downloaded A Course of Miracles within the robot, maybe that could get them coded into the right way, but who knows?
Yeah, I think it is. You pose an interesting question. I think the only thing that we can say is let's be open to learning along with it.
Let's see.
Awesome. So thank you guys. Urine, I don't know if you have anything to add in terms of that question.
No, not yet. Probably to expand more on it later, but yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So we have reached our hour. So thank you for the conversation today. Thank you for the people that have interacted with us, even just following the conversation. To everybody else who has or has not yet, please do feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you'll find all our previous conversations, and we look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.